Dr. Kim Tae-ho stood at the edge of the deep crater on Mars, watching his team carefully brush red dust away from the strange metal object. The wind howled across the empty landscape, but inside his suit, he could only hear his own excited breathing. After 3 months of digging, they had finally found something amazing. "Professor Kim, you need to see this," called Dr. Park Min-soo from inside the crater. Her voice crackled through the radio. "The metal is not like anything we know." Tae-ho climbed down the rocky slope to where his team was working. The object was about the size of a large box, perfectly square and made of metal that seemed to change color in the light. It was buried deep in rocks that were older than any human city on Earth. "How old do you think it is?" asked Dr. Lee Hye-jin, the youngest member of their team. She was taking pictures of every angle. "The computer says it is 50,000 years old," Min-soo replied, checking her tablet. "But that cannot be right. Humans were not even building cities 50,000 years ago." Tae-ho knelt beside the object and touched it gently. The metal felt warm, even through his thick gloves. Strange symbols covered its surface, too worn to read clearly. "Maybe the computer is wrong," he said, but his voice did not sound sure. 3 weeks later, they were back on Earth, standing in the biggest meeting room on Kepler Station. Representatives from all the important alien races had come to hear about their discovery. Tae-ho looked out at the crowd and felt nervous. These beings had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, while humans had only learned to do it 100 years ago. The cube sat on a table in the center of the room, looking very small and ordinary under the bright lights. Tae-ho wished it looked more impressive. "Friends from across the galaxy," Tae-ho began, his voice echoing in the large room. "We believe we have found proof that humans had an advanced civilization long before we thought possible." Ambassador Vextar from the Zenthari Empire made a sound that might have been laughing. He was tall and thin with 4 eyes that glowed purple. His people had ruled much of the galaxy for 3,000 years. "Humans always think they are more important than they really are," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The representative from the Nexus Collective, a being made of living crystal, created musical sounds that meant the same as laughter. "Your people learned to fly between stars only recently. Now you claim to be ancient?" Dr. Lee Hye-jin stepped forward with her data pad. "The tests show the metal is definitely 50,000 years old. The way it was made is impossible to fake." "Tests can be wrong," said the delegate from the Aquatic Council through a machine that changed her water sounds into words. "Maybe you found something that fell from a real advanced civilization." More voices joined in. The beings from different worlds all seemed to agree that humans were being silly. Tae-ho felt his face getting hot with embarrassment. Years of work, and they were treating it like a joke. Ambassador Vextar stood up, his purple robes shimmering with tiny lights. "My fellow beings, we must be kind to our newest members of the galactic community. But we cannot let emotions change science." He walked closer to the table where the cube sat. "The Zenthari Empire has kept records for 15,000 years. We have never seen any sign of an advanced human civilization. If such a thing existed, we would know about it." The crystal being pulsed with agreement. "Our group mind has thought about this problem. We can think of many ways this object could have been made by other races. The chance that primitive humans made it is almost zero." Dr. Park Min-soo tried to speak up. "But the DNA traces in the metal match human DNA perfectly. The quantum signatures are unique to our species." "DNA can get mixed up during digging, Ambassador," Vexter said with a wave of his hand. "This is typical human behavior. You always try to make yourself seem more important than you are." Even the usually friendly Andromedans looked uncomfortable. Their ambassador spoke gently but firmly. "Perhaps this object is just a natural formation that looks artificial. Or maybe it is debris from a real ancient civilization that happened to land on your world." The room filled with quiet conversations. Tae-ho heard words like human delusions and primitive species, and maybe they will grow up someday. When the vote came, it was swift and crushing. The artifact was labeled as unclear geological formation, and humanities research funding was cut by more than half. Taiho watched helplessly as years of careful work were dismissed by beings who saw humans as the galaxy's youngest and least important members. As the delegates left the room, their conversations carried clearly through the air. They were already forgetting about the cube, already thinking about more important things. To them, it was just another example of human foolishness. Dr. Park Min-soo put her hand on Taiho's shoulder. "What do we do now?" Taiho looked at the cube, sitting alone on the table, ignored and forgotten. "We keep working," he said quietly. "Someday they will understand." But deep inside, he wondered if that day would ever come. Ambassador Vextar stood slowly, his 4 purple eyes scanning the assembled delegates with the confidence of someone whose people had ruled the galaxy for millennia. His ceremonial robes caught the light, displaying technology that made human achievements look like children's toys. The room fell silent as he prepared to speak. "Respected colleagues," his voice boomed across the amphitheater. "While we appreciate the enthusiasm of our newest galactic citizens, we must address this matter with proper scientific thinking." Dr. Kim Tae-ho felt his stomach twist as the tall alien looked directly at him. Behind Vextar, holographic displays showed the vast Zenthari Empire spanning thousands of star systems, each one a reminder of their ancient power. "The Zenthari Empire has kept detailed records for 15,000 years, Vextar continued, gesturing to the floating data screens. "Our archives contain information about every advanced civilization that has ever existed in this galaxy. Not once in all our extensive records do we find any mention of an advanced human civilization." Dr. Park Min-soo shifted nervously beside Tae-ho. She had spent months preparing their evidence, but now it seemed so small and insignificant compared to the vast alien databases surrounding them. "The mathematical probability," Vextar said, his voice taking on a lecturing tone, "of such a civilization existing without leaving any trace in our records approaches absolute zero. We have monitored this galaxy for longer than your species has existed." The crystalline representative from the Nexus Collective began to pulse with different colors, creating harmonious sounds that the translation devices converted to words. "Our hive consciousness has analyzed this situation using 17 different calculation methods. We have considered contamination, misidentification, and natural formation processes. The crystal being's form shifted, displaying complex mathematical equations in the air above it. The probability that primitive humans created this artifact, 0.003%. The probability that it originated from known advanced species, 99.7%. Dr. Lee Hee-jin stood up from her seat, her hands shaking slightly. "But we have genetic evidence embedded in the metal structure. The quantum signatures are uniquely human. These cannot be explained by contamination." Ambassador Vextar turned toward her with what might have been amusement on his alien features. "Young human, genetic contamination is easily explained by your clumsy excavation methods. Your species has only been doing archaeology for a few thousand years. We have been studying ancient civilizations since before your ancestors learned to make fire." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The delegate from the Spiral Arm Confederation, a being that looked like a living plant, rustled, its leaves in what their translator called laughter. "Perhaps the humans touched the artifact too much during their digging. Their DNA got mixed into the metal." The representative from the deep space nomads, whose people lived entirely on spaceships, added their voice to the criticism. "We have seen this before with young species. They find old technology from truly advanced races and convince themselves it belongs to their own ancestors." Dr. Kim Tae-ho tried to speak, but his voice cracked with emotion. "The dating methods we used are the same ones you taught us. The quantum resonance patterns cannot be faked with current technology." "Current technology," emphasized the Aquatic Council's delegate, her words bubbling through the translation device. "But not ancient technology. The predecessors, whoever they were, could have easily created false quantum signatures to confuse later archaeologists." Ambassador Vextar nodded approvingly. "Exactly. This artifact could be a test device, a teaching tool, or simply debris from a real advanced civilization. that happened to crash on your world millions of years ago. Even the usually diplomatic Andromedans seemed uncomfortable supporting the human claims. Ambassador Kelu, whose people had been friends to humanity since first contact, spoke with obvious reluctance. Dear human colleagues, perhaps we should consider alternative explanations. Natural crystal formation can sometimes create very regular patterns. Meteor impacts can fuse metals in unusual ways. The Centauri representative, another species generally friendly to humans, added quietly, "The universe is full of mysteries. Sometimes we see patterns where none exist because we want to believe in something greater than ourselves." Dr. Park Min-soo felt tears forming in her eyes. "You are not even looking at our evidence properly. You decided we were wrong before we started speaking." "We are looking at the evidence," Vexitar replied smoothly. "But we are also looking at the source. Humans have a well-documented tendency toward wishful thinking. You consistently overestimate your importance in galactic history." The crystal being pulsed again. "Statistical analysis of human archaeological claims shows a 73% rate of later correction or retraction. Your species has a pattern of seeing significance where none exists." The room erupted in conversations as delegates discussed the human claims among themselves. Taeho caught fragments of their words through the translation devices. Typical human behavior. Primitive species compensation. They will learn humility with time. When the vote came, it was devastating. 87. Delegates voted to classify the artifact as inconclusive natural formation. Only 3 voted to support further investigation, and they were all from species that depended on human trade agreements. The decision was final. Humanity's archaeological budget would be reduced by 60%. The cube would be stored in the station's general archives, no longer considered worthy of serious study. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, their conversations continued without any attempt at privacy. The humans were forgotten almost immediately, dismissed as another example of a young species trying too hard to prove their worth. Dr. Kim Tae-ho sat in his chair long after the room emptied, staring at the cube that had cost him his career and his credibility. Somewhere in his heart he knew they were wrong. But knowing the truth and proving it to the galaxy were two very different things. 3 months had passed since the humiliating presentation, and now the galaxy was burning. What started as a simple argument over mining rights between the Zenthari, Empire, and the Free Worlds Coalition had grown into the largest war anyone could remember. Ancient weapons that had been locked away for thousands of years were being used again. Entire star systems had become battlefields. Captain Lee Dong-wook stood on the bridge of his ship, the Soul's Pride, watching the terrible battle through the main viewing screen. Space itself seemed to be tearing apart as massive Zenthari warships fired energy beams that could destroy planets. The Coalition's war spheres shot back with weapons that made stars flicker and die. "Captain," called Lieutenant Yoon So-ra from her communication station. "Kepler Station is asking for help. They need ships to evacuate civilians." Dong-wook nodded, grimly. His small human fleet was not built for war, but they could save lives. "All human ships, this is the Soul's Pride. We are beginning emergency evacuation of Kepler Station. Follow standard rescue procedures." On the station, Dr. Kim Tae-ho had refused to leave with the other scientists. He stayed behind to protect the archaeological archives, including the metal cube that everyone had laughed at. The station shook violently as the battle moved closer. Emergency lights flashed red, and the air tasted of smoke and fear. Dr. Park Min-soo had also stayed behind to help with the evacuation. She was leading a group of frightened civilians toward the escape pods when she heard something strange. It was a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound made her bones vibrate in a way that felt familiar, like a half-remembered song. "Did you hear that?" she asked the people following her, but they were too scared to notice anything except the explosions outside. The humming grew stronger. Min-soo left the civilians with another rescue worker and ran toward the lower levels of the station. Her feet seemed to know where to go, even though her mind did not understand why. She found Tae-ho in Storage Bay 7, standing in front of the metal cube with his mouth open in shock. The cube was no longer the dull, ordinary-looking box they had found on Mars. Now it glowed with soft light that pulsed in rhythm with the explosions outside. Strange symbols moved across its surface like living things. "Teho, what is happening?" Minsu whispered. "I do not know," he replied, but his voice sounded different, older, somehow. "It started when that Zenthari weapon hit the station's power core. The energy wave passed through this room and the cube woke up. As they watched, the patterns on the cube's surface became brighter and more complex. The humming sound was coming from the cube itself, and Minsu realized it was not random. The cube was responding to the battle outside, reacting to the massive energies being released by the warships. "It is not just responding," Teho said quietly as if reading her thoughts. "It is calling something." Far above them, Captain Lee Dong-wook was trying to coordinate the evacuation when his instruments began showing impossible readings. "So-ra, what am I looking at here?" Lieutenant Yoon So-ra checked her screens 3 times before answering. "Captain, I am reading energy signatures coming from everywhere. Every human world, every human station, every human ship. They are all generating the same frequency." On Earth, Dr. Choi Hai-wan was working late in the Seoul National Museum when every ancient artifact in the building began to glow with the same soft light as the cube on Kepler Station. In the Luna City Archaeological Center, Dr. Shin Woo-jin watched in amazement as Martian relics that had been dead for decades suddenly came alive with energy. Across human space, on dozens of worlds and hundreds of research stations, ancient, human artifacts awakened in perfect harmony. But it was not just the artifacts. On Mars, the ancient ruins where they had found the original cube began to emit energy readings that were higher than anything in the galactic databases. Underground chambers on the Moon, long thought to be natural caves, revealed themselves as sophisticated technological complexes. Back on Kepler Station, the cube's humming reached a crescendo that Teho and Minsu could feel in their hearts. Suddenly, every communication channel in the galaxy carried the same signal. It was not words in any language but pure mathematical concepts that every intelligent species could understand. The Guardians wake, the children have grown, the cycle continues. In the raging battle outside, something impossible happened. The mighty Zenthari dreadnoughts, weapons that could crack planets in half, suddenly went silent. Coalition war spheres found their targeting systems shutting down. Across the entire battlefield, every ship's computer began displaying the same message. Weapons. Systems offline. Protective protocol engaged. Guardians have awakened. Admiral Crixton, commanding the Zenthari flagship, stared at his darkened weapon controls in growing terror. "What kind of trick is this?" he shouted at his crew. His weapons officer's voice shook as he replied, "Sir, it is not just us. Every ship in our fleet, every ship in their fleet, every ship in the entire battle. All weapons are offline. We cannot override the shutdown." On the Coalition command ship, similar panic was spreading. Fleet Commander Zarados watched her battle screens show ship after ship going dark. "This is impossible," she whispered. "No technology in the galaxy can disable every weapon at once." But on Kepler Station, Dr. Kim Tae-ho was beginning to understand. As he touched the glowing cube, memories that were not his own began to flow through his mind. Ancient memories of a time when humans were not the youngest species in the galaxy, but the oldest. A time when they had been the guardians of all, life among the stars. The cube pulsed once more, and across the galaxy the awakening began. The cube's activation sent waves of energy racing across the galaxy faster than light itself. On Earth, Dr. Choi Hae-wan was alone in the Seoul National Museum when every display case began to glow. Ancient pottery, stone tools, and metal fragments that had sat quietly for decades suddenly blazed with the same pulsing light as the cube on Kepler Station. "This cannot be happening," she whispered, but her hands moved automatically to touch the nearest artifact. The moment her fingers made contact, she gasped. Images flashed through her mind, memories that belonged to someone else, someone who had lived thousands of years before she was born. On Luna City, Dr. Shin Woo-jin was cataloging Martian samples when the storage room exploded with light. Every piece of ancient metal, every strange crystal, Every unexplained fragment began to sing with harmonic frequencies. The sound was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "Control room. This is Wu Jin." He spoke into his communicator with a shaking voice. "We have a situation in Lab 7. All the artifacts they are alive." But the phenomenon was not limited to museums and laboratories. Across human space, ordinary people began experiencing something extraordinary. Farmer Kim Jin-soo on the agricultural world of New Busan watched his irrigation system suddenly reveal hidden functions he had never known existed. The simple water pumps transformed into sophisticated atmospheric processors, and somehow he knew exactly how to operate them. On the mining colony of Asteroid Base Delta, engineer Park So-young discovered that her basic drilling equipment was actually advanced planetary reconstruction technology. The knowledge of how to use it filled her mind like water flowing into an empty cup. Captain Lee Dong-wook stared at his ship's instruments as they displayed capabilities he had never seen before. The Soul's Pride was supposed to be a simple cargo vessel, but now his screens showed weapon systems, shields, and faster-than-light engines that were more advanced than anything the Zenthari Empire possessed. "Captain," Lieutenant Yoon So-ra called out, her voice filled with wonder, "I am receiving signals from ships throughout human space. They are all reporting the same thing. Our technology is changing." But the most dramatic changes were happening on the worlds themselves. On Mars, the ancient ruins where Dr. Kim Tae-ho had found the original cube began to rise from the red sand. Massive structures hidden for millennia revealed themselves as the planet's true surface shifted and reformed. What had appeared to be natural rock formations were actually the tops of enormous cities buried by time. The moon's surface cracked open in thousands of places, revealing underground complexes that stretched from pole to pole. Space-based telescopes detected similar awakenings on dozens of human worlds. Every planet humanity had settled, every asteroid they had mined, every space station they had built was revealing hidden layers of ancient technology. On Kepler Station, Dr. Kim Tae-ho felt the knowledge flowing through him like a river breaking through a dam. The cube was not just an artifact. It was a key, a trigger, a wake-up call that had been waiting 50,000 years for the right moment to activate. "Min-soo," he said to his colleague, but his voice carried new authority, new understanding. "We were never alone. We were never primitive. We were just sleeping." Dr. Park Min-soo looked at her friend and saw something different in his eyes. They held depths that had not been there before, wisdom that seemed to come from ages past. "What are you remembering, Tae-ho?" "Everything," he replied simply. "We are the children of the predecessors. We are their descendants, scattered across the galaxy with locked memories waiting for the moment when we would be needed again." The harmonic frequency from the cube reached every corner of human space, and with it came the awakening of genetic memories stored in human DNA for thousands of generations. Ordinary people suddenly remembered skills they had never learned, knowledge they had never been taught. On the agricultural world of New Jeju, children began speaking in mathematical languages that could describe the movement of galaxies. On the mining colony of Titan Base, workers instinctively knew how to operate machinery that had been disguised as simple tools for centuries. But the most shocking revelation came when the hidden human ships began to appear. Throughout the galaxy, in empty regions of space that all the other species had ignored, massive vessels materialized as their cloaking systems deactivated. These were not crude human ships, but elegant craft that made Zenthari dreadnoughts look like toys. Captain Lee Dong-wook watched in amazement as a ship 10 times the size of his own appeared beside the Soul's Pride. Its hull was smooth and perfect, covered in the same glowing symbols as the cube. A voice spoke over his communication system, and he recognized it as coming from another human captain. "This is Captain Lee Min-ho of the guardian vessel Ancient Dawn. We have been waiting for the awakening. Welcome to your true heritage, brother." Across the galaxy, the warring fleets of the Zenthari Empire and Free Worlds Coalition hung motionless in space, their weapons still offline, their crews staring in disbelief at the impossible sight. Hundreds of human ships, each one more advanced than anything in their databases, had appeared from nowhere. But these ships did not attack. They simply waited, their presence a silent message that the balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted, forever. In the Zenthari flagship, Admiral Crixtan finally found his voice. "Get me a communication channel to Earth," he ordered his trembling crew. "It seems we need to have a very different conversation with the humans." On Kepler Station, Dr. Kim Tae-ho smiled as ancient protocols activated in his mind. The galaxy's children had played with dangerous toys for too long. It was time for the Guardians to return to their duties. 50,000 years ago, when the galaxy was young and chaotic, an ancient human civilization had risen to unprecedented heights. They called themselves the predecessors, and they had taken upon themselves the role of gardeners, seeding worlds with life and watching over the developing species with invisible guidance. But power without wisdom leads to stagnation, and the predecessors had made a choice that would echo across millennia. Rather than rule as gods, they chose to fade into legend, scattering their descendants across the galaxy with locked genetic memories and sleeping technologies. They became the failsafe. Dr. Kim Tae-ho stood in the newly activated command center. Beneath Mars, his consciousness somehow interfaced with systems that spanned the galaxy. The knowledge flowed through him, not learned, but remembered. Around him, other humans across the galaxy experienced the same awakening. Captain Lee Dong-wook watched in awe as human ships emerged from regions of space that had appeared empty for millennia, installations that had been operating invisibly, maintained by humans who never consciously knew their purpose, revealed themselves in their full glory. The species that had been mocked for their primitive technology now held the power to disable any weapon, shut down any fleet, protect or destroy entire civilizations with a thought. On the Zenthari flagship, Ambassador Vextar received an unexpected communication. The face that appeared on his screen was familiar: Dr. Kim Tae-ho, the archaeologist he had dismissed so casually months before. "Ambassador Vextar," Tae-ho said, his voice carrying new authority, "the Galactic Council is hereby dissolved. New assembly will convene on Earth in 7 days. Your attendance, along with all galactic leaders, is not optional." Vextar's 4 eyes widened. "You cannot. Humanity has no authority." "Humanity," Tae-ho interrupted gently, "wrote the fundamental laws that govern galactic civilization. We've been the silent guardians for 50 millennia, watching our children grow, hoping you would learn wisdom. The recent conflict suggests that perhaps more direct guidance is needed. Across the galaxy, the most powerful military forces in known history hung powerless in space, their crews staring at weapon systems that would not respond, engines that would not fire without human permission. On Earth, in the ancient chamber beneath Sol that had awakened with the rest, Dr. Park Min-soo looked at his longtime friend and colleague with new understanding. "So what happens now, Tae-ho?" Tae-ho smiled, feeling the weight of 50,000 years of preparation settling on his shoulders. "Now, Min-soo, we decide whether our children have learned enough wisdom to be trusted with their freedom, or whether the Guardians need to take a more active role in their education." In the great assembly hall that materialized around them, technology indistinguishable from magic, representatives from across the galaxy would soon gather, not as equals in a council, but as pupils before their ancient teachers. The laughter had stopped.